The air inside a metal tube, 30,000 feet above the earth, is a fragile democracy. Everyone from the CEO in first class to the student in the last row breathes the same recycled air, trusts the same two pilots. But what happens when the man in charge, the captain in the cockpit, mistakes authority for autocracy? On Apex Air Flight 732, a pilot's snap judgment, fueled by prejudice and pressure, targeted a quiet, unassuming black man in seat 12B. The pilot, king of his domain, demanded his removal. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that he wasn't just kicking off a passenger. He was grounding his own career, his airline's reputation, and challenging the most powerful man in American aviation, the director of the FAA himself. This isn't just a story of mistaken identity. It's the story of how a single act of injustice triggered a reckoning that shook an entire industry to its core. The controlled chaos of Chicago O'Hare International Airport was a symphony Dr. Marcus Thorne knew well. The rhythmic beeping of baggage carts, the cacophony of overlapping gate announcements, the distant roar of jet engines spooling up for departure. It was the pulse of a nation on the move. For most travelers, it was a stressful, unavoidable gauntlet. For Marcus, the newly appointed director of the Federal Aviation Administration, it was the front line. He traveled like this often, unannounced, flying commercial in a simple charcoal suit, his credentials tucked away in a worn leather briefcase. He believed you couldn't regulate an industry from a sterile office in Washington, D.C. You had to feel its vibrations, witness its friction points, and see the faces of the people who depended on its safety and efficiency. Today, his destination was Washington Reagan, a routine flight, Apex Air 732. He was just another face in the river of humanity flowing towards Gate C-28. Marcus, a man whose calm demeanor was forged in a career as an Air Force test pilot and honed through years of accident investigation, was a keen observer. He noticed things. He saw the gate agent, a young woman named Sarah whose name tag was slightly askew, juggling 3 different tasks with a frayed smile. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, rebooking a family whose connection had been missed, while her other hand clutched a phone to her ear, listening intently to a staticky voice from the flight crew. The line of anxious passengers before her was growing, their collective impatience a palpable force. He noted the weariness in her eyes, a look he'd seen too often lately. It was the look of a system stretched thin, of employees asked to do more with less. Apex Air, like many carriers, was aggressively expanding its routes post-pandemic, but the hiring and training of ground staff hadn't kept pace. It was a data point, a small piece of a much larger puzzle he was constantly assembling in his mind. "Sir, can I help you?" Sarah's voice finally cut through his thoughts. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice a low, steady baritone. He slid his boarding pass across the counter. "Just wanted to confirm my seat assignment. 12B. Sarah scanned it, her eyes darting between her screen and the paper. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. 12B, exit row. You're all set. We'll be starting the pre-boarding process in about 10 minutes. Looks like a full flight today." Her smile was professional, but it didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "Thank you," Marcus replied, stepping aside. He found a seat with a clear view of the boarding area and the aircraft parked just outside the panoramic window. A Boeing 737-800, its winglets proudly displaying the sharp, angular Apex Air logo. He watched the ground crew moving with practiced, if hurried, efficiency. The fuel truck disconnected, the baggage loader hummed, the catering truck pulled away. It was a complex ballet, and every dancer had to hit their mark perfectly on time. Any deviation, any misstep could have cascading consequences. The pre-boarding call came, and the familiar hierarchy of air travel began to assert itself. First-class passengers with their designer luggage, families with young children, and then the tiered loyalty program members. Marcus waited patiently for Group 3. When his group was called, he joined the queue, his briefcase in one hand, a copy of an aerospace engineering journal in the other. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration ran through the floor. It was followed by a low-frequency hum, a sound slightly different from the usual auxiliary power unit whine. It was a harmonic resonance, a faint thrumming that felt out of place. His pilot's instincts, honed over thousands of flight hours, pricked up. It could be anything. A new type of ground power unit, a specific quirk of this particular airframe, or nothing at all. But it was another data point. He found his seat, 12B, an aisle seat in the exit row. He stowed his briefcase in the overhead bin and settled in. The familiar scent of cabin air, a sterile mix of recycled oxygen and cleaning fluid, filling his nostrils. He nodded to the woman in the window seat and the man in the middle, then opened his journal. But he wasn't really reading. He was listening to the sounds of the aircraft as it prepared for its journey. The main cabin door sealed with a pneumatic hiss, cocooning the passengers from the outside world. The lead flight attendant, a sharp, efficient woman in her 40s, began the safety demonstration. Marcus watched, noting her professionalism. He also noticed a younger flight attendant, Amelia, who seemed nervous. Her movements were slightly hesitant, her smile a little too bright, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as the passengers. Then the captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Good morning, folks. This is Captain Richard Jansen speaking. Welcome aboard Apex Air Flight 732 with service to Washington Reagan. Flight time today will be about an hour and 45 minutes once we get airborne. The weather in D.C. is clear, so we should have a smooth ride. Cabin crew, please prepare for departure." The voice was clipped. It wasn't the folksy, reassuring drawl some pilots adopted. It was sharp, authoritative, and carried an undercurrent of impatience. It was the voice of a man who was used to being in command and perhaps didn't suffer fools gladly. Marcus had known pilots like Jansen, excellent stick and rudder men, technically proficient, but whose cockpit resource management skills were sometimes lacking. Their authority was absolute in the air, and some let it bleed into every interaction. The aircraft began its pushback from the gate. As the engines spooled up, the low-frequency hum he'd noticed on the jet bridge returned. More pronounced this time. It seemed to emanate from the port side of the aircraft, near the wing root. It wasn't the typical roar of a CFM56 engine. It was a deeper, resonant vibration that he could feel through the floor of the cabin. He leaned slightly into the aisle, trying to pinpoint the source. It was a sound that suggested a possible issue with a hydraulic pump or an improperly seated access panel vibrating in the engine's airflow. It was likely benign, something that maintenance would catch during the next A-check, but it was also the kind of small anomaly that, under the wrong set of circumstances, could be a precursor to something larger. He'd investigated enough incidents that started with a funny noise to know that vigilance was never misplaced. He decided calmly and quietly that he would mention it, not as a challenge, but as a professional courtesy. A simple observation from one aviator to another. He unbuckled his seatbelt, a decision that would unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would reverberate far beyond the confines of Apex Air, Flight 732. He stood up, intending to catch the eye of the young flight attendant, Amelia, as she passed. It was a simple act, born of a lifetime of dedication to aviation safety. He had no idea he was about to step into a storm, not of weather, but of human failing. Amelia was making her final compliance check, her mind a whirlwind of procedures. Secure galley, check lavatories, arm doors. She was relatively new, only 6 months with Apex Air, and the pressure to be perfect was immense. Captain Jansen was known throughout the fleet for his exacting standards and his short temper. A delay on his flight was a personal affront, and any crew member deemed responsible would feel his wrath. As she moved down the aisle, her eyes scanning seatbelts and tray tables, she saw the man in 12B stand up. He was tall, distinguished-looking, with a calm, intelligent face. He wasn't frantic or demanding, but standing during taxiing was a clear violation of regulations. "Sir," she said, her voice polite but firm, "for your safety, I need you to be seated with your seatbelt fastened. We're about to take off." Marcus gave her a reassuring, disarming smile. "Of course, miss. I just had a quick professional observation for the flight deck. It's nothing urgent, but I thought they might want to know." "I can pass on a message after we reach cruising altitude, sir," Amelia insisted, her training kicking in. "Please take your seat." "I understand," Marcus said, his tone still even, "but it pertains to a sound the aircraft is making right now, on the ground. It's a low-frequency harmonic resonance from the portside engine. It could be indicative of a hydraulic pump issue or a loose panel. I'm a pilot myself, and I thought the captain might appreciate a second set of ears. His words were measured, technical, and devoid of any emotion. He wasn't a panicked passenger. He sounded like a colleague. But to Amelia, caught between airline policy and a passenger who was clearly knowledgeable, it was a complication she didn't need. The pressure from the cockpit was already immense. "Sir, I'm sure our pilots have everything under control," she said, her voice tightening. "Please, I must insist you sit down now." Marcus saw the anxiety in her eyes. He wasn't trying to cause a problem for her. "Very well," he said, and immediately sat down, clicking his seatbelt into place. He had tried to be discreet. The matter was, in his professional opinion, closed for now. He would file a report through official channels later. But the exchange, brief as it was, had been noticed. A passenger a few rows back had overheard the words "engine issue" and was now looking around with wide, fearful eyes. The seeds of anxiety had been sown. Up in the cockpit, Captain Richard Jansen was stewing. They were third in line for takeoff, and O'Hare's ground control was a well-oiled machine. Any delay on his part would ripple through the tightly packed departure schedule. His mind wasn't just on the flight. It was on the alimony payment that was due tomorrow, the scathing email from his ex-wife sitting in his inbox, and the performance review from an Apex Air Chief pilot that noted his less-than-optimal turnaround times. He felt squeezed from all sides, and the cockpit was the one place on Earth where his word was law. The call button chimed. "Yes," Jansen barked into his headset. It was Amelia's nervous voice. "Captain, sorry to disturb. A passenger in 12B stood up during taxi. He's seated now, but he was saying something about a noise from the port engine. He claimed to be a pilot." Jansen's knuckles whitened on the yoke. A passenger pilot. The worst kind. Armchair aviators who'd flown a Cessna 172 once and thought they knew better than a man with 20,000 hours in his logbook. In his stressed and agitated state, Jansen didn't hear professional observation. He heard challenge. He heard disruption. And in the face of the man described by Amelia, his mind, clouded by a lifetime of unexamined biases, painted a picture. He saw a troublemaker, someone trying to grandstand, to create a scene. "What did he look like?" Jansen demanded, a question that had absolutely no bearing on the mechanical state of the aircraft. Amelia hesitated. "He's an African-American gentleman, Captain, in a suit, very polite." Jansen's jaw tightened. The description, for reasons buried deep in his own psyche, confirmed his unfounded suspicions. It clicked into a narrative of arrogance and defiance that he had constructed in his head. "He's questioning my aircraft and causing a disturbance during a critical phase of flight," Jansen said, his voice cold and decisive. To his first officer, a younger man named David, he muttered, "That's it. I'm not taking a chance with a potential unruly passenger. Not today." David looked surprised. "Rick, he's seated now. Maybe we just have security meet us at the gate in DCA if he acts up again." "No," Jansen snapped. "The flight is full. This guy starts making a scene mid-flight. We have nowhere to put him. He's already planted a seed of doubt with other passengers. He's a security risk. I want him off. Now." Jansen toggled the radio. "Ground Apex 732. We're holding our position. We need to return to the gate. We have a passenger to deplane." A sigh was almost audible from the controller. "Apex 732, roger. Turn left on taxiway Bravo 7 and return to gate C28. Let me know when you're on the ramp." The 737, which had been so close to the runway, began a slow, ponderous turn of shame back towards the terminal. A collective groan went through the cabin as passengers realized they were heading the wrong way. Jansen's voice came over the intercom again, this time laced with steel. "Folks, apologies for the delay. We have a minor security issue to resolve. We'll be returning to the gate momentarily and should be on our way again shortly. Please remain seated." In seat 12B, Marcus Thorne felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew what was happening. His quiet, professional concern had been grotesquely misinterpreted. The aircraft docked with the gate again. The jet bridge reconnected with a dull thud. Sarah, the gate agent, appeared at the cabin door, her face a mask of confusion and stress. She was accompanied by two airport security officers. Amelia walked down the aisle, her face pale. She stopped at row 12, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. "Sir," she whispered, her voice trembling, "the captain has requested that you leave the aircraft." A hush fell over the surrounding rows. Passengers craned their necks, their faces a mixture of curiosity, fear, and judgment. Marcus looked at Amelia, then at the security officers waiting at the end of the aisle. He remained perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. His mind, trained to process emergencies with ice-cold logic, was analyzing the situation. He could argue. He could protest. He could, with a single sentence and the flash of a credential, bring this entire charade to a crashing halt and plunge Captain Jansen's career into immediate jeopardy. But that wasn't his way. To reveal himself now would be to make it about him, about one man's ego against another's. This was no longer about a strange noise from an engine. It was about a catastrophic failure of judgment in the cockpit. It was about a pilot whose temperament made him a liability. And to understand the depth of that liability, he needed to see how the system responded when it thought it was dealing with an ordinary citizen. An ordinary black man. He slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He didn't look at the other passengers, whose stares felt like physical blows. He met Amelia's gaze, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of profound shame in her eyes. "May I retrieve my briefcase from the overhead bin?" he asked, his voice steady, betraying no hint of the fury and disappointment brewing within him. "Of course, sir," Amelia mumbled. He stood, retrieved his bag, and walked calmly down the aisle toward the open door. Every step was deliberate. He was no longer just a passenger. He was an investigator, gathering evidence through his own humiliation. He passed the cockpit door, a closed, impenetrable barrier behind which sat the man who had passed this sentence. King Jansen, in his metal castle, had made his decree. And as Dr. Marcus Thorne stepped off the plane and into the waiting glare of the terminal, he knew that the king was about to learn a very harsh lesson about the true extent of his kingdom. The fluorescent lights of the terminal seemed unnaturally harsh after the dim cabin of the plane. Marcus stood on the jet bridge for a moment, flanked by the two security officers, who looked more awkward than authoritative. They had been told to escort a disruptive passenger, but the calm, impeccably dressed man before them defied the description. Behind him, he could hear the murmurings from the aircraft. The door was still open. He could feel the eyes of 200 people on his back. The humiliation was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak he had to consciously shrug off. He straightened his tie and walked towards the gate, his expression unreadable. Sarah, the gate agent, stood by her podium, wringing her hands. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice strained, I am so sorry. The captain has the final say on who is permitted to fly." "I understand the chain of command, miss," Marcus said, his voice quiet but resonant. He looked directly at her, not with anger, but with a piercing, analytical gaze. "Can you tell me the specific reason Captain Jansen gave for my removal?" Sarah stammered, unable to meet his eyes. He cited a security concern, a verbal disturbance with the cabin crew, questioning the safety of the aircraft. She trailed off, knowing how flimsy it sounded. "I see," Marcus said. He looked past her to the plane, where the cabin door was finally closing. The engines began to spool up again. Flight 732 would depart, leaving him behind, an inconvenient footnote in its journey. "And what is Apex Air's protocol in this situation? Am I to be rebooked?" "Yes, of course," Sarah said, relieved to have a procedural script to follow. "Let me see. The next flight to Reagan has one seat left, but it's not until 7 p.m. this evening. I can book you on that. And the airline can offer you a $500 travel voucher for the inconvenience." A $500 voucher. The standard corporate apology for a colossal failure of judgment, for an act of public degradation fueled by prejudice. The absurdity of it was almost comical. Marcus felt a flicker of grim amusement. They thought they were dealing with a disgruntled customer. They had no concept of the storm they had unleashed. "I'll take the booking for the later flight," he said. "You can hold the voucher for now." He took the new boarding pass from her and walked away from the gate, finding a quiet corner in a nearly empty waiting area. The adrenaline from the initial confrontation was fading, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. This was a teachable moment, as the bureaucrats in D.C. like to say. But this lesson would not be taught in a classroom. It would be taught in boardrooms, in hangars, and in the very cockpits of Apex Air. He took out his personal cell phone, not the encrypted government-issue one, and found a number in his contacts. He pressed the call button. It rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "David." "Marcus," came the reply from David Chen, his sharp, incredibly efficient deputy director. "You're supposed to be in the air. Everything all right?" "There's been a change of plans," Marcus said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm still at O'Hare. I was removed from Apex Air Flight 732 at the captain's request." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. David Chen was a man not easily surprised. "Removed? On what grounds?" The official reason was security concern. "I made a quiet observation to a flight attendant about a potential mechanical issue I heard during taxi. The captain, a Richard Jansen, apparently interpreted that as a disruptive act." Marcus paused, letting the unsaid words hang in the air. David, who knew Marcus's history and character intimately, understood immediately. "Let me guess. He didn't know who you were." "He knew I was a black man in a suit," Marcus corrected him gently. "That seems to have been the operative piece of information." David swore under his breath, a rare show of emotion. "What do you want to do, Marcus?" "I can have our general counsel on the phone with Apex's CEO in 5 minutes. We can have that pilot's certificate suspended by the time he lands." This was the tempting path, the path of immediate, overwhelming retribution. But Marcus knew that punishing one arrogant pilot was like treating a single symptom of a rampant disease. Jansen was a product of a culture, and it was the culture that needed to be put under the microscope. "No, David, not yet," Marcus said, his voice taking on the cool, decisive tone he used when leading an investigation. "For the next few hours, I am simply Marcus Thorne, a wronged passenger. Apex Air believes they have placated me with a later flight and a voucher they haven't even given me. I want to see their internal process play out. I want to see the report Captain Jansen files. I want to see how the flight attendant, Amelia, writes her statement. I want to see how far up the chain this goes, and at what point, if any, someone questions the captain's judgment." "You're turning your own wrongful removal into a covert audit," David stated, a note of admiration in his voice. "Precisely," Marcus confirmed. "This incident is the tip of an iceberg. Jansen's arrogance doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's enabled by a system. I want to know how deep the rot goes at Apex Air. I want you to start a file, quietly. I want a full workup on Captain Richard Jansen, his training records, his simulator performance, any prior complaints or commendations. Pull the records on his first officer as well." "Consider it done," David said. "Then broaden the scope," Marcus continued, his gaze fixed on another Apex Air jet pushing back from a nearby gate. "I want our team to start a preliminary data trawl on Apex's entire operation. Pull their incident reports for the last 24 months. Look for patterns. Are their pilots reporting maintenance issues at a lower rate than other legacy carriers? Are their on-time departure stats suspiciously high, suggesting that crews might be pressured to overlook minor squawks? Cross-reference that with their safety hotline reports. Look at their crew scheduling. Are they pushing their pilots and flight attendants to the legal limit on duty hours? You're looking for evidence of a culture that prioritizes schedules over safety, a culture that breeds pilots like Jansen," David concluded. "Exactly. His decision to remove me wasn't just about prejudice, David. It was about expediency. He saw a potential delay, a complication to his perfect on-time departure, and he eliminated it in the most extreme way possible. He didn't de-escalate. He didn't investigate. He commanded. I want to know if Apex Air encourages that kind of thinking." "I'll get the ball rolling immediately," David assured him. "The investigative teams will be firewalled. No one will know the request is coming from you personally. It will look like a routine data analysis project." "Good," Marcus said. "Let the system work. Let Captain Jansen land in D.C. believing he's a hero who averted a crisis. Let Apex Corporate log this as another minor customer service complaint. I want them to write their own story of what happened today. Then we'll show them how the story really ends." He ended the call and sat back in the uncomfortable airport chair. The storm had passed over him, but he had just summoned a far greater one. It was gathering strength over the horizon, a silent, data-driven tempest of federal oversight. And Captain Richard Jansen, currently cruising at 35,000 feet, was flying directly into its path, utterly oblivious to the reckoning that awaited him on the ground. At 35,000 feet, the world below was a serene tapestry of green and brown, and the sky above was a brilliant, endless blue. Inside the cockpit of Apex Air 732, the atmosphere was anything but serene. First Officer David Miller kept his eyes on the instruments, his hands resting lightly on the controls, but his mind was replaying the scene at the gate. "Can't be too careful these days," Captain Rick Jansen said, breaking the sterile silence. He had the autopilot engaged and was leaning back in his seat, a cup of coffee in hand. He sounded self-satisfied, like a man who had successfully navigated a difficult problem. "You give these guys an inch, they take a mile. Start questioning the plane, spooking other passengers. Before you know it, you've got a full-blown panic on your hands." David Miller chose his words carefully. Rick Jansen was his superior, a senior captain with immense influence over his own career progression. A negative report from Jansen could stall his upgrade to captain for years. "I guess so, Rick," David said noncommittally. It just seemed abrupt. The flight attendant said he was polite. "Polite is how it starts," Jansen scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "They're always polite at first. Then they start demanding to speak to the pilots, filming with their phones, claiming their rights are being violated. I've seen it a dozen times. This guy in his fancy suit probably thought he could flash a frequent flyer card and get a tour of the cockpit. He thought he knew better than us. I'm not running a debate club up here. I'm flying a 100-ton piece of machinery with nearly 200 souls on board. My word is final." End of story. The echo chamber of the cockpit was complete. There was no one to challenge Jansen's narrative. He was the commander, the arbiter of reality for the flight, and his reality was that he had neutralized a threat. His biases, reinforced by his authority, had calcified into fact. "Did you get his name?" David asked, more out of a sense of procedural box-checking than genuine curiosity. "Thorne, I think the agent said," Jansen replied, shrugging. "Doesn't matter. He'll probably write a nasty letter to corporate. They'll throw a voucher at him, and we'll never hear from him again. It's the cost of doing business." Jansen took a sip of his coffee. His personal pressures, which had been a raging inferno on the ground, had now subsided to a low simmer. He had asserted control, the one thing he felt he was losing in every other aspect of his life. His ex-wife, Brenda, couldn't touch him up here. The bank couldn't repossess his Boeing 737. He was king, and he had just banished a dissenter from his kingdom. His phone buzzed with a text message, routed through the aircraft's Wi-Fi. It was Brenda. "Rick, the mortgage payment bounced again. What did you do with the money from the 401k loan? If you don't fix this by Friday, I'm calling my lawyer." Jansen's good mood evaporated instantly. He typed a furious reply. "I'm in the middle of a flight. The money is tight because of your spending, Brenda. I'll handle it when I land." He hit send with more force than necessary. The old anger, the feeling of being trapped and squeezed came rushing back. That passenger, Thorne, became an easy vessel for his free-floating rage. See? Everyone was out to get him, to question him, to make his life harder. He'd been right to get rid of him. "You know, Dave," Jansen said, his voice now hard-edged, "the problem with this job now is the passengers. They're not like they used to be, entitled. Every one of them thinks they're an expert because they watched a show on the Discovery Channel. They don't respect the uniform anymore." He conveniently forgot that the man in 12B had identified himself as a pilot. In Jansen's revised history, Marcus Thorne was simply an entitled troublemaker. The detail about his profession was an inconvenient fact, and so it was discarded. As they began their descent into the Washington, D.C. area, Jansen went through the landing checklist with his usual brusque efficiency. He was a good pilot in the technical sense. He could fly the plane by the book, handle a crosswind landing, and manage the energy of the aircraft with practiced ease. His landings were often praised for their smoothness. But the most important parts of his job, judgment, temperament, and crew resource management were failing. He greased the landing at Reagan National, touching down so smoothly that a smattering of applause broke out in the cabin. The praise was a balm to his bruised ego. He taxied to the gate, shut down the engines, and made his final announcement. On behalf of Apex Air and your entire crew, I'd like to welcome you to Washington, D.C. Thanks for flying with us. As the passengers deplaned, the lead flight attendant came to the cockpit door. Smooth landing, Captain. Thanks, Jansen said, already unbuckling. That passenger, the one we removed, you'll need to file a report. So will Amelia. Make sure you document that he was causing passenger anxiety by questioning the airworthiness of the aircraft and refused to follow crew instructions initially. He was framing the narrative, ensuring the official record would reflect his version of events. The flight attendant nodded, accustomed to taking a captain's direction on such matters. Amelia, standing behind her, looked at the floor, her face troubled. She knew that wasn't exactly how it happened. The man had been calm. He had sat down when she insisted. But who was she, a junior flight attendant, to contradict a senior captain's report? Her own job could be on the line. Jansen grabbed his flight bag and strode out of the cockpit. He walked down the jet bridge with a confident gait, the conquering hero returning home. He had done his job. He had kept his flight safe and on schedule, or close enough. He was already thinking about the bar at the crew hotel, about the first cold beer that would wash away the lingering stress of Brenda's text message. He never once looked back. He had no idea that his actions in that echo chamber, 35,000 feet in the air, had been recorded, analyzed, and were now forming the basis of an investigation that would reach far beyond a simple passenger complaint. He believed he had closed a chapter. In reality, the book of his downfall had just been opened. 3 days later, in a sterile cubicle farm in Apex Air's corporate headquarters in Dallas, a customer service representative named Kevin clicked open complaint file 774B. The passenger's name was Marcus Thorne. The summary read, involuntarily denied boarding at ORD on 10/14. Per captain's request, security concern. Passenger was rebooked. Offer standard $500 travel voucher. Kevin sighed. It was his 15th such file of the day. He copied and pasted a form letter into an email. Dear Mr. Thorne, we regret the circumstances that led to your travel disruption on Flight 732. At Apex Air, safety and security are our highest priorities. The captain of an aircraft has the final authority in all matters concerning the safety of the flight and its passengers. While we cannot override the captain's decision, we would like to extend our apologies for the inconvenience this caused you. As a gesture of our goodwill, please accept the enclosed voucher for $500 towards a future Apex Air flight. Sincerely, Apex Air Customer Relations. He clicked Send and moved the file to the closed folder. In the vast impersonal machinery of the airline, the incident was now officially resolved. A problem had been identified, a standard solution applied, the cog had turned. Meanwhile, in a secure, windowless room in Washington, D.C., a very different kind of tribunal was in session. This one was unseen, its proceedings silent and digital. The file on David Chen's desk was no longer preliminary. It had grown into a multifaceted investigation, drawing data from a dozen different FAA departments. An analyst named Maria pointed to a chart on a large monitor. Here's the pattern, Mr. Chen, she said, her voice sharp with discovery. We've analyzed Apex Air's pilot-initiated maintenance reports, we call them squawks, over the past 2 years. Their rate is 18% lower than the industry average for a 737 fleet of their age and size. They have better planes? David asked, playing devil's advocate. Unlikely, Maria countered. Their maintenance logs show a standard number of repairs and parts replacements. The planes aren't healthier. The pilots just aren't writing them up as often. Now look at this. She pulled up another chart. It showed on-time departure statistics, cross-referenced with pilot bonuses. Apex has one of the most aggressive on-time bonus structures in the industry. A captain can increase their quarterly pay by up to 15% for maintaining a 90% or better on-time departure rate. A last-minute maintenance squawk would kill that percentage. So pilots are incentivized to ignore minor issues to get off the gate on time. David summarized, the pieces clicking into place. It's a powerful incentive, Maria confirmed. It fosters a get-there-itis culture. Now let's look at Captain Jansen. Jansen's file appeared on the screen. It was thick. On the surface, he was a model pilot. Excellent simulator check rides. Thousands of hours, no major incidents. But the deeper data told another story. His squawk rate is 40% lower than even the Apex average, Maria said. He almost never writes up an aircraft for a minor issue. His on-time departure rate is 96.4%. He's a top earner on the bonus program. But look at his crew resource management evaluations from his first officers. She highlighted a series of comments from co-pilots, buried in routine post-flight reports. Phrases leaped out. Reluctant to accept input. Discourages alternate viewpoints. Creates a steep authority gradient in the cockpit. He's an autocrat, David said flatly. The kind of pilot who thinks CRM stands for captain's right, mostly. Exactly, Maria agreed. Now, here's the most damning part. We pulled the internal reports for Flight 732. She brought up two documents. The first was Captain Jansen's report. It was concise and self-serving. It described a verbally aggressive passenger in seat 12B who was challenging the integrity of the aircraft and causing alarm to those around him. It stated the passenger refused initial crew instructions to be seated, necessitating a return to the gate to deplane him for the safety of the flight. The second document was the statement from flight attendant Amelia Cortez. For the first 2 days after the flight, she hadn't filed one. She had been terrified. Contradicting a captain was career suicide, but the incident had gnawed at her. The quiet dignity of the man in 12B, the injustice of it all. On the third day, she logged into the corporate system from her home computer and wrote the truth. Her report described Marcus Thorne as calm and polite. It quoted him accurately about the harmonic resonance and noted that he had identified himself as a pilot. Crucially, it stated that he immediately complied when she insisted he sit down. It directly contradicted her captain's version of events. "She's a brave woman," David murmured, reading Amelia's words. "She is," Maria said, "and she just handed us the fulcrum we need." Jansen's report isn't just a difference of opinion, it's a falsified official document. He lied about the passenger refusing to comply to justify his extreme actions. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place. They had the motive, a culture that prized punctuality over prudence. They had the means, a pilot with an autocratic command style and a history of discouraging dissent. And now they had the proof of a cover-up, a falsified report contradicted by a credible witness. The incident with Marcus Thorne was no longer an isolated event. It was the key that unlocked a systemic, deeply rooted cultural problem at Apex Air. Captain Jansen's prejudice had made him careless. His arrogance had made him lie. And in doing so, he had exposed the very culture of negligence that his employer had so carefully cultivated with its bonus structures and performance metrics. "All right, Maria," David said, standing up. "We have enough. Prepare a formal letter of investigation to be delivered to Apex Air's CEO, Mr. Harrison. It will inform him that the FAA is launching a full-scale, top-to-bottom audit of their operational procedures, safety culture, maintenance reporting, and crew training programs, effective immediately, and issue a formal summons for one Captain Richard Jansen to appear at FAA headquarters for a hearing regarding his conduct on Flight 732 and the potential falsification of a safety-related report. His flight certificate is to be suspended, pending the outcome of that hearing. The unseen tribunal had reached its verdict. The silent digital investigation was over. Now the storm would make landfall. The official letter from the Federal Aviation Administration arrived not by email, but by a courier who hand-delivered it to the 50th floor office of James Harrison, the CEO of Apex Air. The heavy bond paper and the formal seal of the U.S. Department of Transportation signaled that this was no routine inquiry. Harrison read the letter once, then twice, his face draining of color. Full-scale operational audit, allegations of systemic safety culture deficiencies, falsification of official records. The words swam before his eyes. An FAA audit of this magnitude was a corporate catastrophe. It meant investigators crawling through every department, from maintenance hangars to crew scheduling. It meant canceled flights, public scrutiny, and a stock price that was about to cliff dive. His mind raced. What could have triggered this? There had been no major incidents, no crashes. They were the darlings of Wall Street, praised for their efficiency and on-time performance. He buzzed his assistant. Get me the head of legal and the VP of flight operations in my office, now, and find out everything you can about an incident on Flight 732 from O'Hare to Reagan last Tuesday, a passenger removal. 30 minutes later, the three of them were huddled around Harrison's mahogany desk, the FAA letter lying in the middle like a dead serpent. The VP of Flight Ops, a former pilot named Peterson, pulled up the file on his tablet. Here it is, sir. Captain Rick Jansen removed a passenger for disruptive behavior. Standard procedure. The passenger was questioning the safety of the plane, causing a fuss. What was the passenger's name? Harrison asked, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Thorne. Marcus Thorne, Peterson replied. Harrison felt a sudden, sickening jolt, as if the elevator in his high-rise had just dropped 10 floors. He had met the new FAA director at an industry conference a few months ago. He remembered the name. He remembered the face. He scrambled for his computer, typing Dr. Marcus Thorne, FAA, into the search bar. The official FAA photograph loaded on the screen. It was him, the calm, intelligent face of the most powerful man in American aviation. The man his pilot had kicked off a plane. The silence in the room was absolute. Peterson stared at the screen, his mouth agape. The lawyer looked like he was about to be physically ill. Oh my God, Peterson whispered. Rick removed the director of the FAA. And then he lied about it in his report, Harrison added, his voice a strained rasp, connecting the final, fatal dot. The FAA knows he lied. This isn't a random audit. This is a targeted strike. We handed them the ammunition to tear us apart. The hammer fell on Captain Richard Jansen that afternoon. He was at home arguing with his ex-wife on the phone about a late payment when the call came from Peterson. He was ordered to report to Dallas headquarters immediately. He assumed it was a commendation, a pat on the back for his decisive handling of the unruly passenger. He walked into the conference room with a confident swagger that quickly evaporated. He was met not by a smiling VP, but by James Harrison himself, along with two grim-faced lawyers from the airline's legal team. Rick, sit down, Harrison said, his voice dangerously low. They laid it all out, the passenger's identity, the statement from Amelia Cortez that contradicted his own, the FAA letter, the immediate suspension of his flight certificate, the impending federal investigation. Jansen's face went white. The world tilted on its axis. He was the director? He never said anything. He wasn't obligated to, Rick, Harrison exploded, his corporate decorum finally cracking. He was a passenger on your aircraft, and you treated a United States government official, a pilot, a black man, with contempt. You didn't assess, you didn't de-escalate. You made a snap judgment based on God knows what prejudices you carry around in your head, and then you lied about it. I was protecting my flight, Jansen stammered, his defense sounding weak even to his own ears. You were protecting your on-time departure bonus, the lawyer cut in sharply. And in doing so, you've jeopardized this entire airline. The audit is going to uncover every corner we've ever cut, every time a pilot like you decided a maintenance issue could wait. Your arrogance didn't just get you in trouble, Captain. It has potentially cost this company hundreds of millions of dollars. The fight went out of him. The echo chamber of the cockpit was gone, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the boardroom. There was no one to agree with him here, no one to reinforce his flawed narrative. He was alone, exposed. Apex Air is terminating your employment, effective immediately, Harrison said, his voice like stone. We will be fully cooperating with the FAA's investigation. That includes turning over your complete record and the conflicting reports from Flight 732. You'll need a lawyer, Rick, a very good one. Jansen stumbled out of the room in a daze. In the space of 15 minutes, his 2-decade career was over. His identity as a captain, the one thing that had propped up his ego through a failed marriage and financial strain, was gone. He wasn't a king anymore. He was just a man in a pilot's uniform with nowhere to fly. The news broke the next morning. Apex Air under full FAA audit. Pilot fired after removing FAA director from flight. The airline's stock plummeted 22% in pre-market trading. The story was everywhere, a viral tale of karma and corporate comeuppance. The narrative wasn't just about a pilot's mistake, it was about a system that enabled him. Journalists and investigators started digging into Apex's safety culture, and the patterns the FAA had found began to emerge into the public light. The karma wasn't just a hammer that fell on one man. It was a floodlight that was now illuminating every dark, neglected corner of an entire corporation. 6 months later, the fallout from Apex Air Flight 732 was still settling. The FAA audit had been brutal. It had uncovered systemic issues, forcing Apex Air to ground a portion of its fleet for mandatory maintenance checks and to completely overhaul its pilot training programs, with a new intense focus on crew resource management and implicit bias training. The airline's CEO, James Harrison, had been forced to resign. The on-time departure bonus program was scrapped, replaced by a system that rewarded pilots for proactive safety reporting. The cost to the airline was astronomical, but the industry as a whole was put on notice. Dr. Marcus Thorne sat before the Senate Subcommittee on Aviation. The Klieg lights were hot. The cameras of the news networks were focused intently on his face. He was not there to talk about his personal humiliation. He had steadfastly refused to give interviews about the incident itself. He was there to talk about what came next. The incident on Apex Air 732 was not, at its heart, about one pilot's poor decision, Marcus said, his voice calm and steady, filling the august chamber. It was a symptom of a creeping cultural disease in some corners of the industry, a culture that can, if left unchecked, begin to value schedules over safety and authority over collaboration. The cockpit of an airliner should be a place of rigorous cooperation, not a kingdom ruled by a single unquestioned monarch. He spoke for nearly an hour, not as a victim, but as a regulator and an aviator. He used the Apex case to lay out a new vision for the FAA's oversight, one that used advanced data analytics to proactively identify cultural rot before it led to an accident. He spoke of the authority gradient and the importance of empowering junior crew members like flight attendant Amelia Cortez to speak up without fear of reprisal. Amelia, who had been praised by the FAA and promoted by the new management at Apex Air, was sitting in the audience, watching him with quiet admiration. "We cannot regulate away human prejudice," Marcus continued, looking directly at the senators. "But we can and we must build systems of accountability and training that mitigate its effects. We must create an environment where a pilot's first instinct is not to remove a problem, but to understand it. Where a quiet, professional concern from a passenger, any passenger, regardless of their race or background, is treated with respect, not suspicion." In a small rented apartment hundreds of miles away, Richard Jansen watched the testimony on a flickering television. He was a changed man. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of regret. He had lost his career, his pension, and the last vestiges of his self-respect. His pilot's license had been revoked for 3 years. He was working as a dispatcher for a small cargo company, his commanding voice now just one of many in a noisy room, routing trucks instead of planes. He listened to Thorne's words, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of his failure. It wasn't just that he'd kicked the wrong man off a plane. It was that he had been the wrong kind of man in the pilot's seat. He had let his personal grievances and his deep-seated biases cloud his judgment. He had failed the most fundamental test of a captain, the test of character. His karma hadn't been a single event, but a long, slow education in humility. Months later, Dr. Marcus Thorne was once again at an airport, boarding another flight. This time he was traveling on official business, and the gate agent recognized him instantly. He was upgraded to first class, and the captain came out of the cockpit to shake his hand before departure. "It's an honor to have you aboard, Director Thorne," the young captain said, his eyes filled with genuine respect. "The honor is all mine, Captain," Marcus replied warmly. "Have a safe flight." He settled into his seat, but he didn't luxuriate in the extra legroom or the pre-departure orange juice. His gaze went to the window. He watched the ground crew, listened to the hum of the engines, and observed the flight attendants as they prepared the cabin. His work was not about personal vindication or perks. It was about the integrity of the system. The incident with Captain Jansen had been a painful, ugly ordeal, but from its wreckage, a stronger, more transparent, and safer aviation culture was being built. The hammer of karma had fallen, but it had also been a craftsman's tool, breaking down a flawed foundation to build something better. As the plane accelerated down the runway and climbed gracefully into the sky, Marcus Thorne looked out at the horizon, his focus already on the next challenge, always seeking a higher, safer altitude for everyone. That single moment of prejudice on Flight 732 didn't just end a career, it became a catalyst for change across an entire industry. It's a stark reminder that the systems we rely on, whether in aviation or our daily lives, are only as strong as the character of the people who run them. Captain Jansen's story is a powerful lesson in karma, showing how arrogance and bias, when left unchecked, can lead to a downfall that is as swift as it is absolute. But Dr. Thorne's story is one of quiet strength, proving that the right response to injustice isn't just about punishment, it's about using that moment to rebuild the system, making it safer and more equitable for everyone. If this story of accountability and consequence resonated with you, please hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into stories that matter. And we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed an abuse of authority? What do you think is the best way to ensure accountability? Your engagement helps our community grow. Thank you for watching.